Final segment of A to Z here on Locked On Sports Atlanta, free on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. You know what to do. Search Locked On Sports Atlanta. Give me a follow on Twitter at Mark Zinno. Whole network is at Locked On ATL. And before we get to the Hawks schedule, which I think has some really interesting segments to it, let's just say that. We'll call them segments at this point in time. It is now time for Shovel of Wisdom.
Brace yourselves, because it's time for the Shovel of Wisdom.
And of course, you know how we do it every day. We like to whack somebody straight upside the head for saying or doing something stupid, set them straight with a Shovel of Wisdom. You can do so on my Twitter account at Mark Zinno. Just use the hashtag Shovel of Wisdom. Today, my shovel goes to Antonio Brown. Repeat offender, Antonio Brown. Except this time, I know he's wrong. Yeah, in case you missed it, Antonio Brown took to Twitter last night to take shots at, of all people, Tom Brady. Yeah, not a good idea, AB. I mean, listen, I love your hijinks and your antics. I said that before. I don't know whether you're crazy or smart or having fun or just being serious or whatever. But when you take shots at Tom Brady, 99.9% of the time, you're going to be wrong. He tweeted out, Alex Guerrero, you think I won't have smacked at TB12? Boy, stop playing with me. Boy, getting paid by bucks and taking players' money too. I guess he's referring to a shot at Alex Guerrero, but he added in a second tweet that Tom Brady manipulated the game, gets 14 days to go home to get his mind right. Now you see the difference. Put that ish on. Yeah, I'm not really sure. Now, Tom Brady, again, has taken a leave of absence from the team for 2 weeks, so he could deal with some personal things. This is according to head coach Todd Bowles. The break was scheduled prior to training camp kicking off. None of this is new. I mean, again, Tom Brady's not regular people. He's not regular football players. When you've won 7 Super Bowls and you are the greatest quarterback to ever put on football pads, you get to do what you want, bro. That's just the nature of the game. There's no getting around that. There's no reason to even think that anybody else is in the same stratosphere as that. I mean, this is a unique individual who gets to say what he wants to do, and everybody does it. Remember, Tom Brady chose Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay didn't choose Tom Brady. That's how this goes down. So wherever Tom wanted to go, that's where Tom went. And this is just a scenario where Antonio Brown is doing more damage to his already damaged reputation. And that's the problem. If you'd like to take shots at Tom Brady, you better be squeaky clean yourself. You don't have to be as great as Tom Brady, but you better be squeaky clean. And Antonio Brown is certainly not squeaky clean. Okay. Let's get to the Hawks schedule. It was released. The NBA schedule was released yesterday. And there are some notable things about the schedule. And I want to get to some interesting stretches that I think that are there. Of course, the Hawks open up at home, and they will actually open up with 3 straight home games. They'll play 13 sets of back-to-backs. Now, back-to-backs last year were not their strong suit, especially from a cover standpoint. If you're into that sort of thing, we can talk about that later. But they aren't really anybody's strong suit. So from that standpoint, it's one of those things, conditioning maybe, whatever it may be, try to take advantage of winning back-to-backs earlier in the year when you have fresher legs, because you know you're going to be resting guys otherwise. So the longest break that they'll have, 8 days between games before and after the All-Star break on February 19th. So they'll have 8 days off. You know how the schedule sets up: 4 against divisional opponents. So that's Miami, Charlotte, Orlando, and Washington. And then 3 against all the other Eastern Conference opponents. Obviously, a home and home with everybody from the West. A couple of notable dates. They play on MLK Day, or their MLK game against Miami on January 16th. That's one that's worth noticing. Dejounte Murray faces the Spurs on February 11th, and then again March 19th. The Hawks go to Madison Square Garden, where Trey loves to play, on November 2nd and December 7th, so they come early. And the only appearance by the defending champions is March 17th. Golden State comes to State Farm Arena. So look at some interesting little scheduling quirks here. As I mentioned, they open the season with 3 straight home games, and then they go out on a 5-game road trip. But their first 5 opponents, are you ready? Houston, Orlando, Charlotte, Detroit. 0 playoff teams in the first 5 opponents. 0, guys. Now, I don't know about you, but if they don't start out 4-1 or 5-0, already I think alarms are going to be going off. They should start, like, if they are better and they are improved, and Dejounte Murray, the best thing they could do this offseason really does make them that much better, why shouldn't they start out 4-1 or 5-0 against the worst defense in the league last year in Houston, against a super young team in Orlando that couldn't score a lot last year, against a bad defense in Charlotte, one of the worst in the league again, against a young team in Detroit that has more rookies and second-year players starting than most teams in the NBA, if not all of them. Why? I mean, that is right from the jump. If the Hawks dig themselves an early hole by going 2-3, I mean, it's not like it's going to be the end of the world, but you don't want to start off on that note. I get it if you face Milwaukee in the opener and Philadelphia and teams like that, and, high-level teams in the East, Boston, whatever it may be. You got the dregs of the East in the opening part of your schedule for 5 games. And at a minimum, they should start 3-0 winning those games at home. Both Detroit games are in Detroit. There's a weird thing that has happened this year with the schedule that I'll get to, because they play Detroit on Wednesday, October 26th at Detroit, and then on Friday, October 28th at Detroit, where they have these 2 games in the same city 2 days apart. It's not a home and home. Like, there's a stretch that comes up, and I'll get to the rest of the other quirks because, well, there's 2 more. They play back-to-back games in Miami and back-to-back games in Washington later on this year, which is an interesting stretch as well. So after those 5 games, I think the next interesting stretch starts really the following week, November 10th. Ready? You get a home and home against Philadelphia, a game against Milwaukee, a game against Boston, a game against Toronto, and a game against Cleveland. That's a sort of 6-game stretch in the middle of November, the second or third week of the season that really is going to test this team. I mean, those, with the exception of Cleveland there, and Cleveland is young and they're good and they were better more of last year than they weren't, but those are 5 playoff teams that you're facing in a row last year. And oh, by the way, if you want to back it up just a little, you get Milwaukee and Utah prior to the home and home against Philadelphia. So really, Milwaukee, Utah, Philly, Milwaukee, Boston, Toronto. All playoff teams from last year. All of them. That's a tough stretch in November. They get a little bit of a reprieve, through the latter part of November. Obviously some tough games in there. They'll see Miami for the first time on the 27th. They'll travel to New York to play the Knicks in Brooklyn in a 2-day span, 3-day span, I should say, 7th, 8th, and 9th of December. They get some more of the lower parts of the East, Charlotte, Orlando, Detroit, Indiana, again towards the end of December. Then on the 30th, they play the Lakers at State Farm Arena. And then they head out for a West Coast swing at Golden State, at Sacramento, at the Lakers, at LA. So 5 games all against the Western Conference starting on December 30th, going through January 8th. Back-to-back games at the Staples Center. Another weird thing, against 2 different teams. So there's that West Coast trip. Then there is one more West Coast swing at the beginning of February that's interesting. All on the road, 5 in a row: Portland, Phoenix, Utah, Denver, and New Orleans. How do you match up against those teams? How do you end up, hanging with some of the better teams in the West, playoff caliber teams? That's tough. Told you about this little 4-game road trip, back-to-back at Miami, March 4th and 6th, back-to-back at Washington, March 8th and 10th. Those are your division opponents. It's weird. It's a scheduling quirk that I don't really recall seeing much all that often, maybe once, but when they did it 3 times in the schedule, and again, if you include the 2 against Detroit, that's the 3rd time, and then did both games in LA, Lakers and Clippers, but that's not all that uncommon because most teams do that when they're doing a West Coast swing. So, but here's the deal to close out the end of the season. 5 of their last 6 games against playoff teams from last year. At Brooklyn, home for Dallas, at Chicago, home for Washington, home for Philly, at Boston. If they need wins down the stretch of this thing, it could be very tough for them if they're not playing their best basketball against those opponents. Going to be an interesting year for the Atlanta Hawks. Got a little bit of time before we get there, but it's going to be interesting to say the least. All right, that'll do it for us here on A to Z. Make sure you guys give me a follow on Twitter at Mark Zinno, MarkZinno. Follow us at Locked On ATL. Thanks for making A to Z your first listen. Make your next listen hitting hard with John Chucker right here on Locked On Sports Atlanta. You guys have a great Thursday. Don't take any crap from anybody. See ya.